Come on. 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 Come on.
That's very easy, wouldn't it? They get very excited, don't they? You know, this whole thing of holistic management, and particularly when it comes to animals and land, is about observation and determining, you know, when to move animals, and it's moving from winter grazing to spring grazing, and not putting grass that's only just starting to grow under too much pressure. So our first few moves with cattle were really quite fast. We moved them over the land really quickly. We weren't leaving them in the paddocks that we set out for them for any more than about 12 hours. And during the last week or so, the length of time they've been spending in paddocks has increased to 24 hours, 36 hours. And also the size has changed. You know, we started off with relatively large paddocks of about a quarter of an acre, and now we're into paddocks which are about 0.15 of an acre, something like that. But it varies day to day, depending on the topography, how much rock there is in the paddock, how much flat ground. So it's really just a question of just on the hoof judgment. And you know, we quite clearly sometimes get it wrong, and that doesn't matter, because we're just in the process of continuously finding out what works best. And of course the weather's always changing, so it's just an inexact science. In fact, it's not a science, it's an art. This is the first year that we've actually grazed cattle and sheep together. We were busy during the winter bucket training all the animals, so that at least anyway when we called them they'd come. But I couldn't actually see how we were going to get sheep and cattle in the same field together. Why I thought that was going to be difficult, I can't imagine, because it turned out to be really easy. I think, you know, the bucket training, you know, with grass pellets was really the thing that did it. And we now realise actually we don't need a dog. I mean, it wouldn't matter if we've got 100 sheep, you know, if we've got them bucket trained, and if we're actually with them every day moving them, you know, they're waiting for you. They know what's going to happen. I mean, the first 2 days were a bit odd, you know, and the sheep would spend their time in the corner of a paddock and kept well away from the cattle. But no, they've sort of integrated now, and they're happily coexisting. Nobody really has been challenging the electric fence. So, you know, we trained all our animals when they were young in the autumn, just for, I suppose they had about 3 days with an electric fence. in about November last winter, and then the sheep we let them all go, and they were all grazing wherever they chose to graze all the way through the winter, and I'd sort of imagined that perhaps they might have just forgotten about the electric fence, but no, they hadn't, and the sheep haven't challenged it at all. And I think also, just the notion that we might be solving a lot of problems like worm burdens by having cattle and sheep together, it just seems actually now quite normal and natural.
So spring has been, for me personally, a huge learning curve. I did the 8-day holistic management course in May, which was really useful. There's been a lot of terminology used here, especially by Roger, that I loosely understood. I generally knew what he was implying, but since the course I've been able to walk around here at the croft and apply it to my own thinking, and it's now starting to make a lot more sense to me, and it's affected my outlook on the land in a hugely positive way. Other things we've been doing, we've been mastering the electric fencing to keep the flood in order, and moving of the cattle and the sheep across the paddocks, which has been really nice to see, with the way they interact with each other and the way they jump around when they go into a new paddock. That's been really exciting. We've also completed the dog field. We spent a few weeks putting up new fencing, new ryelock, just to keep the dogs in order and keep them in where we want them, because we don't really want any dogs running around chasing sheep and things like that and upsetting other people. That wouldn't go down too well at all. And we've recently gone back into the workshop and continued with the window frames. We've been gluing them together and routing out the rebates using different machinery this time, and it's all going really well.
There you go. Yeah. Is that it? Yeah. Is it clockwise or anti-clockwise? First clockwise. Yeah. Palm up, then palm down.
You ask about electric fencing. I have to say that the last few weeks, they haven't been a nightmare, but we have had some amazingly tangled results from trying to put up 3 lines of fencing at the same time. We're using a Kiwi Tech system, which is actually in itself pretty brilliant. I think, it's the operators who are not that good, but it's going to prove to be really useful. You can even if it takes you half an hour to put up a 3-line electric fence. If you were putting every wire up individually, it'd take you an awful lot longer. So I think successful. I think we just need to become really proficient at understanding how to get wires untangled from the machine that we use to dispense the stuff. It just has a life of its own, and when you're not particularly practiced at using it, can be problematic.
Mine's straight but a bit wonky.
Straight but a bit wonky.
I think the thing that worried me most was the fact that we've got the bottom wire is very close to the ground, and I couldn't at first see how we were going to cut the grass to allow the bottom wire not to come into contact with damp material. And surprisingly, we've come back to using a scythe, and the scythe does it absolutely brilliantly. You put the fence up first and then scythe whatever grass is touching the bottom wire off afterwards, and you can literally do it pretty much at a slow walking pace. So that's what we thought was going to be a problem. Actually hasn't turned out to be a problem at all. But it's really interesting that it isn't that we want to go back to wearing hair shirts, but using a scythe has proved to be not only quiet, really efficient. It's also a sort of meditation. Teaching Dan how to sharpen a scythe, how to peen one, which is cold forging the edge of a scythe blade with a hammer on an anvil. A sharp scythe is an absolutely wonderful tool, and it's very nice not to have to deal with the noise and the awkward nature of a strimmer that won't start when you want it to. Not using fossil fuel, actually getting back in touch with yourself, and just becoming part of the landscape, I guess. Doing things quietly and not hurrying, and then finding actually you get jobs done pretty quickly anyway.
So they keep the hens inside an electric fence, really for their protection. It's not really stopping them getting out, it's stopping the mink getting in, because we do have a mink problem here. And I'm going to move them tomorrow, and they've been in here really waiting for there to be some nice pasture to go on that the cattle and the sheep have been on, because the cattle and the sheep do their business, the dung beetles like to do their business, and the hens like to eat the dung beetles. But we've only really just started our mob grazing because we've been waiting for the grass to start growing. It's growing like mad now, and then we leave it about 3 weeks before passing the chickens over the same pasture. And so in the meantime, they've been in here eating tadpoles, which they love. And that makes very delicious eggs. And also they get lots of green material to eat, and that's what makes eggs so lovely and bright orange. We've got about 24 hens all sort of hiding around in here, and they have our lovely mobile hen coops that Roger built to move around in, and we would probably keep them on a pasture about maximum 10 days. And what's lovely about that is then they get all the cowpats and sort of scoot them about, which spreads the fertility around. And they also eat some of the bugs that affect cattle that would maybe give them worms or produce fluke, and they're a dead-end host because the fluke and the worms can't then carry on any further and go back out into the soil. If I was to wear a t-shirt, it would have "Let me play in the garden and just cuddle hens," because I love them. So we decided to do no-dig gardening because in Argyll it's usually extremely wet at the time when you really want to be digging and starting to put things in. And Roger wasn't going to dig all of it, and we wanted to grow all our vegetables. So we got a book from Charles Dowding on organic gardening, the no-dig way, and that seemed like a wonderful idea. And you do have to get rid of things like docks and nettles and couch grass, and any of those really pernicious things. We're lucky enough not to have ground elder here, thank goodness. You want to get rid of them first, and then you just keep laying on layers of something delicious, like seaweed we're very lucky to have because we're up by the sea. Or it might be muck from a cattle yard, making sure that it hasn't just recently been treated with stuff for worms, because it doesn't do your nematodes and stuff any good in your soil, and you're wanting quite a lot of those. But we use seaweed, and you can probably see from here, I don't know whether you can catch that. This hasn't been dug in about 8 years, 9 years now, and it's just the most delightful soil. And all we do is lay seaweed on about this thick in winter time, sort of at the November time, and the worms just come up and gobble it up and take some of it into the soil. And then when we come to plant in the springtime, we just sort of, Fika and I have just been parting it and planting in plants and then sort of drawing it round again. And then days when it's wet, the seaweed's all nice and wet and juicy, and days when it's dry, it goes all crispy like this. We did our no-dig beds in a rather different way. We didn't raise the beds, we lowered the paths, which seemed an easier way to do that in a field. And then gradually, as the levels of the beds have come up, we've had to add another layer of wood. And these have lasted well, but we are coming to the year where one or two of them are getting a bit dodgy, getting a bit soft, so we've put some new ones in. But that's a very quick job to do.
In the beginning they stayed far, far away, but now they're like, what you got? Since you live on an island, I live on an island, you kind of need a couple of jobs to keep yourself going. There's not one 40-hour job going on the island that will keep me entertained for the whole week. So for the last year I've been working as a nursery teacher in the Lismore Primary School, where I have currently 5 pre-5s. I took over from a lady who went on maternity leave and got twins. So I was really lucky to get into the school. With my education background, I guess I was really lucky to have such a wonderful job on the island. Dan spends quite a lot of time down at Sailean, and I only have afternoons available at the minute with school going. So sometimes I feel like I've got a bit of catching up to do when I come down here. And Dan has already been in the morning, and they talk about so many things, and I come for lunch and I need to catch up on everything that's been talked about. Also because we don't live on the Sailean farm yet, it's quite a lot of travelling in between and rushing from one job to another, which it's only a small island, so relatively it's nothing. But it's all going on in your mind of, oh, I need to be here at that time and there and that time. And sometimes that's a bit of a challenge with everything that's going around on the island, and you're in community volunteering and the school job and the Airbnb and trying to be there for people for breakfast and be there in the evening when they arrive and trying to clean up after yourself and trying to do the house. And then we also share about 20 sheep that we have on our own house, on our own croft, that we have to take care of, and we have a cat and a dog and chickens. So it's quite a lot going on our peaceful island. But since we're such an early stage yet, I think it's all trying to communicate very well about that and see what we all need and how many jobs I can take on here and what my niche will be as well. I am really trying to figure out what it is that I do well and I can bring to the Sailean project and to the Sailean farm. And so my first real project was trying to arrange the dog weekend. So we've been working together with Epic Dog, a company who is situated in Glasgow. And last weekend we had our first training. My job in all this is that I've arranged the accommodation, and together with Julie we cooked all the meals for the guests. It was really nice first weekend. There was only 3 people really attending the course, and it was more of a staff training weekend. But it was really interesting to see how it all went and what was needed and when I needed to be where and how much work went into it. But I think it was really successful and we learned a lot, so we're hoping to have many more dog training weekends here in the future. still feel like I've got so much learning to do. And every time I come down here, I go away with even more questions. But I think for us as a couple, Dan and me, I think we've made a really big change, because we're both wanting to aim for something in the future, and we both didn't have a clue where we were going to go. So it pulled us together as a team and as a couple.
Since the beginning of May, when the weather improved and we had some great spells of sunshine, and especially recently in the last 3 weeks, there's been a huge improvement in the amount of forage in the paddocks. We've seen some beautiful flowers come and go. There's been some lovely orchids and buttercups and all sorts of wild flowers, and now they just look like idyllic meadows that you would expect to see children skipping around in. It's really nice, especially since I did the holistic management course. We spent a day on Rogers Croft here doing some ecological monitoring. We did that with a group of people, and our general conclusions were that his paddocks were really in good condition. Out of the one paddock that we looked at, we found only 1% of bare ground, which is really good. So that shows that something's being done right here.
So you're looking at the soil surface right now, and you're wanting to describe it. I encourage you to use your fingers and talk with each other about what you're finding. So why is it growing moss, everybody?
Because it's got...
Because there's a bear patch.
Bear patch. It's capped.
Yeah.
By the matting material.
Yeah. There's a lot of really good stuff going on there.
There is. It's very
I'm glad you agreed with me.
Yeah.
Oh, look, I've got a wild worm or something. Got a little beastie. But yeah, there's lots of organic material in here. I'm pleased about that. Yeah. You know, you can't pull it apart. And you've got this layer at soil level, this stuff.
I'm starting to understand the language that the land is speaking, if you like. I'm understanding what it's saying to me after being on the course, and how to interpret that, what it means about what we're doing, right or wrong. Maybe we need more animals here. Maybe we need a lot more animals here to create the effect that we want. I'm seeing life in a different light. I've got a much more positive outlook on the future now, because, like I said in the last video, the opportunities are really endless, and the world is our oyster. So it's all looking positive and bright and blooming in the spring.